And you need to make sure that you don't just copy what I said. You need to actually check to make sure that you're on pages 9 to 10. Eventually, when we're doing activities in here, you want to make sure you're putting down your correct pages. In the beginning, we're pretty much all the same. But as time goes on, pages will start to vary. 1.1, evaluate expressions. Evaluate the expression. We have, what's the first one say? What's A say? What's it say, Hunter?
13 times n when n equals
13 times n, and we know n is 3, and we get 39. There you go. It means division, and so we don't use the old elementary symbol anymore. We use fractions to represent division. I'm not going to insult anybody and ask them to say C for me, n minus 1. I really want to know if you knew those symbols. 3 minus 1, and then n plus 8 would be 3 plus 8. All right. And then obviously there's not too many ways to represent addition or subtraction. But multiplication, there are different ways to represent multiplication. All right. Multiplication, obviously you have this symbol that we don't use anymore for obvious reasons. Obvious reasons. We use the dot, but
the star.
You wouldn't use the dot with decimals because it becomes confusing. You wouldn't use this multiplication sign with variables, confusing. And, you know, we don't usually use the star even though it's on a computer, but we do know the star can mean multiplication. That's not a very good star.
Which I'm assuming you use the star when you have decimals.
Well, you wouldn't use the star. I'm not going to write a star when I'm writing out a problem. You know, if I'm writing by hand, I'm not going to go star. That's more of a technology one. The one that I would use would be, anybody else got anything else? Parentheses are the ones that you use all the time. So you could have 2 parentheses next to each other to show multiplication. You could have a variable next to parentheses. You could have a number next to parentheses. That means multiplication parentheses. That is the one that we use all the time. Or just putting 3n next to each other, right?
I knew that.
You could just
not thinking.
Could also do this, just a number and a variable right next to each other. And then division, obviously you have this symbol that's not used at all in high school. Should have been phased out early in junior high school, but we will use a fraction bar. So I will say like 3, I'll say 8. 8 divided by x. This means division. All right, a letter used to represent one or more numbers. What's it called? A letter. There you go. I wonder why it's called a variable. What is the... It varies. Very good. They don't just name stuff just to name them. They have a root meaning to them. Variable means it varies. The variable could be 1, 2, 3, -10, doesn't matter.
52.
Exactly. An expression that includes at least one variable. An expression that includes at least one variable. What's it called? A-L-G-E-B-R-A, algebra. And then put IC at the end. Algebraic. An expression that represents repeated multiplication of the same factor. An expression that represents repeated multiplication of the same factor. Like you're trying to figure it out, give yourself an example of what that actually means. It's an expression that shows multiplication of a repeated factor. Give yourself an example of what that says. Numbers, use numbers. What does that say?
Like 3 to the second power.
Multiplication would be like 3 times 3 times 3. When you're thinking about it, but that's the answer they actually want. It's an exponent. The blank represents the number of times the blank is used as a factor. The blank represents the number of times the blank is used as a factor.
The exponent. The number, the tiny number. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, it's called an exponent.
Okay, I was right. It is an exponent.
So we want to know what these two parts are named. What are each of these parts named? Because that's what goes in over here. What's this called? That's the exponent. And what is this called? All right, so now we need to figure out which one goes where. The blank represents the number of times the blank is used as a factor.
The exponent represents the number of times base is used as a factor.
This says z to the fifth when z equals 1, so I'm just showing myself that it's set up. These are your notes, so you really should show it in your notes. What you do on your homework is your own business.
It's 1.
Unless, of course, you fail, then it's my business. All right, 1 to the fifth, it just means 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Which is 1.
Set up the next one.
Yeah.
So this equals 8, right? 2 times 4 is 8.
No.
I'm always going to ask you thought-provoking questions, okay? I give the wrong answer. Sometimes
It's 16.
that's my job. My job is to, didn't I just say don't go along with the crowd? I said be an independent thinker, do your own evidence. That's what I mean. That was good, wasn't it?
Obviously.
2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. My job is to help you become critical thinkers and to have your own opinions, not to follow my opinion, not to follow the opinion of the world. My job is to help you to become critical thinkers. There, you just passed your first test because you had your own answer down. Okay? But you kind of failed because you agreed with me. All right, 1.5 raised to the third power. I prefer this. Make sure everything's included in that, showing it's 1.5 to the third. I don't think the other one is wrong because it's a decimal. But if you're a messy writer and it starts to look like a multiplication sign, then you might not be able to read your own writing. 1.5 to the third power, 1.5 times 1.5.
Times 1.5.
Now my question is, how are you at finding answers here? Go ahead and do it. Did you do it already? Forget about the decimal and just do the multiplying to start with. You can do 15 times 15 times 15. You're already halfway there. Not lining up decimals, that's just where they happen to be. You only line up decimals when you're adding and subtracting, but that's where they end up being right now. Starting in the ones place, 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2. And then I multiply to the tens place. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. And I'm done multiplying in the ones place. I'm done. Now I'm moving on to the tens place, but when I start my answer, I better make sure I'm starting my answer in the tens place. So most people will put a 0 to fill in to start in the tens place. If I'm multiplying from the tens place, I better be starting there. 1 times 5 is 5, and then 1 times 1 is 1. We add our answer. 7 and 3 is 10, plus 2 more is 12. Now I just need to figure out where to put my decimal. How many decimal places total? 2 total decimal places. And so I come down here and go 1, 2. We have 2.25 times one more, 1.5. Notice how my decimal is not lined up this time. You're not lining up decimals. You're lining up your numbers. This is a skill that's really important. If you find yourself in Honors Algebra 1 right now being weak in any of these skills, don't shy away from your weaknesses, embrace them, and work harder at them this year. Surprisingly, again, the United States is not even in the top 20 in the entire world for mathematics and science. These skills we need to keep working on. 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus the 2 is 12. Carry the 1. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11. And I'm done multiplying from the ones place. And I'm moving on to the tens place. I fill in a 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 2 is 2. And add them up. How many total decimal places in the problem?
2.
There's 3. There's 2 here and then 1 right here. 3 decimal
I
places.
thought you were talking
I start from the back and I count over 3. 1, 2, 3. Final answer. Who can say this number correctly? Let's see. Who haven't I called on? Let's go with Abigail. And it's hundreds, thousands. Great job. 3 and 375,000. So if I had to make a fraction, I could do 3 and then 375 over 1,000. That's why it's important to be able to speak the language of math, because then you can turn it into other forms. All right, let's